Operators of strike drones from the Special Operations Center A of the Security Service of Ukraine attacked locations where Russian equipment and personnel were stationed in temporarily occupied territories. According to the SBU, the spectacular nighttime fireworks were provided by FP2 drones equipped with a 105-kilogram warhead. The security service emphasized that they continue to eliminate Russian occupiers by all available means. Since the beginning of the day, 102 combat clashes have been recorded on the front line. The situation in the Pokrovsk direction remains the most difficult, but it is under control. As noted by Ukrainian military personnel, the Russian army is suffering catastrophic losses here. More details about the situation on the front line are coming up in our report.
In the Sloviansk direction, units of the Russian occupiers unsuccessfully tried to advance in the areas of Yampil and Hrihorivka. According to the soldiers of the Special Operations Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, small enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups were detected and destroyed in Yampil. These groups had planned to establish a foothold here for further assault operations. The fighters cleared the area and prevented the enemy from advancing further.
As a result of the coordinated actions of Ukrainian soldiers, the enemy suffered losses and was pushed back from Yampil. The Special Operations Forces continue to carry out combat missions in the most difficult directions, delivering precise and effective strikes against the enemy. Not a single attempt by the enemy to break through or gain a foothold will go unanswered. And a message from the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Telegram.
In the Pokrovsk direction, Ukrainian soldiers repelled the most Russian assaults. The occupiers made a third of all recorded attempts to break through the defense forces' positions on the front here. Military experts note the successes of the armed forces of Ukraine north of Pokrovsk.
The defense forces were truly able to break through, push back, and isolate large groups of Russians who, generally speaking, when they are isolated, don't really act up much. They wait for food, water, and ammunition to be dropped to them by drones, but they don't try to carry out any active offensive actions. And all of this, of course, affects the situation north of Pokrovsk, because the main objective of the Russians, to encircle Pokrovsk from the north in order to further assault the city, remains unresolved. And while all these forces are engaged in the meat grinder around the Dobropilia salient, the enemy has very little prospect of encircling Pokrovsk.
Moreover, as military experts note, in this section of the front, the Russian occupiers are suffering simply catastrophic losses in personnel. Just from January to August of this year, the Russian army lost about 300,000 soldiers here.
It is noteworthy that in the Pokrovsk direction, the loss coefficient, that is so-called irrecoverable losses, is 0.02 and sanitary losses is 0.03, are almost 1-to-1. The classic formula is 1-to-3, meaning 1 irrecoverable loss to 3 sanitary losses. And this is already evidence that the Russian Federation is unable to organize evacuation measures and the level of tactical medicine is critically low.
In addition, more than a third of all Russian attacks were repelled in the Lyman, Konstantinovka, southern Slobozhansky, as well as northern Slobozhansky and Kursk directions. In addition, Ukrainian soldiers showed the destroyed and captured positions of the Russian 810th Marine Brigade taken by the armed forces of Ukraine. A pile of trophies, a pile of everything. Right, Kiva? Yes. Yep. In just one day, Ukraine's defense forces eliminated 1,120 Russian soldiers at the front. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army have exceeded 1,120,000 people. In addition, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, 5 Russian tanks and 14 armored combat vehicles, 13 artillery systems, and 70 units of automotive equipment were also destroyed the day before.
The Ministers of Economy and Finance of the European Union in Luxembourg discussed providing Ukraine with a reparations loan using frozen Russian assets. The amount in question is 140 billion euros. This is the first discussion of the initiative at the technical level. This issue will next be raised at meetings with G7 partners in Washington during the annual IMF meeting next week.
it is obvious that Russia, as the aggressor, must compensate for the damage caused to Ukraine. As for funding Ukraine this year, everything is going according to plan. The implementation of existing ERA loans is progressing successfully. 25.3 billion euros have already been allocated by partners from the G7 and the EU. We expect that another 8.4 billion euros will be allocated by the end of the year.
Is it a problem that earlier several countries were categorically opposed to implementing the project to use frozen Russian assets as a reparations loan for Ukraine? But after the informal meeting of EU leaders in Copenhagen last week, the discussion has finally moved forward. Not long ago, the largest economy in Europe, Germany, changed its position and is now also discussing the use of the frozen funds. EU officials and a number of EU countries hope to find a solution to this issue as soon as possible.
We want to and will continue to actively support Ukraine. The point is to open up new financial freedom of action, and for that we are ready to take a much tougher approach to Russia's frozen assets, to use them, and also to look at how we can provide Ukraine with new billions to defend itself. The point is to make sure that all of this is legally safe, that we find legally sound ways to do it here.
The finance ministers of EU countries agree that the sanctions against Russia are indeed working and that the Kremlin is deliberately distorting the real state of the Russian Federation's economy.
Swedish intelligence claims that the government in Russia is deliberately, and I'm not surprised, lying about inflation. They know that it is 20 to 21%, just as we do, but they do not say so officially. Why don't they do that? They want us to believe that the sanctions aren't working, that Ukrainian soldiers might lose some of their resolve to fight. But the restrictions are working, and we will continue to do everything we can. For our part, we are working hard to strengthen the sanctions and ensure their enforcement. The Russian economy is quite small, just 12% compared to the EU economy, and it is not doing very well. That is exactly what I would like to convey to my colleagues.
The United States is increasing pressure on Russia in cooperation with NATO, announced US President Donald Trump during a meeting with Finnish leader Alexander Stubb in the Oval Office. The head of the White House made this statement against the backdrop of failed attempts to reach a peace agreement with Putin regarding Ukraine. Donald Trump also discussed defense spending for the North Atlantic Alliance with Alexander Stubb. Kristina Dombrovskaya has more details.
Washington and its NATO allies are increasing pressure on Russia to end the war against Ukraine. US President Donald Trump stated this during a meeting with Finnish President Alexander Stubb. The head of the White House expects that the Ukrainian and Russian sides will hold negotiations in the near future. However, he reiterated that ending the Russian Federation's war against Ukraine is a very difficult issue. The president of Finland expressed hope that a peace agreement in Ukraine would be the next achievement of the Trump administration. In this context, he mentioned how, together with other European leaders, he met with the US president at the White House in August.
We will continue to work. The last time I was here in the Oval Office was in August, together with other European leaders. We have made significant progress on security issues. I think you have really pushed us Europeans forward. Not to buy oil and gas from Russia, which in my opinion is a very correct decision. Europe has just approved its 19th sanctions package. I think that right now, Russia is not in a very advantageous position, either economically or militarily. And I believe this is because of the commitments we have made to Ukraine. So, day by day, we are working on this.
The meeting also discussed strengthening defense partnership within NATO and the role of Finland in ensuring the security of the alliance's northern flank. For his part, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, even promised to help Finland in the event of an attack by Russia. Although in his opinion such aggression from the Russian Federation is unlikely. At the same time, he added that the Finnish army is one of the best.
I would defend them, yes. They are a NATO member. I would defend them. They are wonderful people. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think he will do it. Yes, I think the chances of that are very, very small.
In turn, the President of Finland recalled his country's historical confrontation with Russia. That's about 30 military conflicts from the 8th century to the 20th. At the same time, Alexander Stubb emphasized that Finland is now among the most combat-ready countries in Europe and has powerful defensive capabilities. He welcomed the further strengthening of the bloc countries' defense, in particular up to 5% of GDP at the initiative of the US president.
I think a more important component is the need to increase our defense spending and strengthen Europe's defense potential. And that's exactly what we've been doing, in my opinion, since the very beginning of Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. Not only in Finland, which became a NATO member, and Sweden, but we are also increasing defense spending from 2 to 5% of the total NATO troop strength. Therefore, I think people are beginning to realize that we need to strengthen our deterrence so that a conflict with Russia becomes impossible.
Analysts note that during Alexander Stubb's presidency, relations between Finland and the United States have noticeably strengthened. In a recent interview with the British newspaper The Guardian, the head of Finland stated that he views cooperation with Washington as strategic, especially in matters of defense, energy, and technology. During the meeting between Donald Trump and Alexander Stubb, they officially agreed on the construction of 11 icebreakers for the United States. Their cost exceeds $6 billion. According to Trump, the icebreakers are vitally necessary to strengthen U.S. national security in the Arctic. Washington intends to deliver the first of them in 2028. Earlier, the head of the White House stated the need to acquire up to 40 new icebreakers in order to strengthen national security in the Arctic and thus counter the growing influence of China and Russia in the region. Kristina Dombrovskaya for Freedom TV Channel.
Ambassadors of the G7 countries held urgent talks with Ukraine after the attack by the Russian Federation. The diplomats met with Minister of Energy Svetlana Hrinchuk and representatives of the energy sector. They discussed the most pressing needs after the massive strike, as well as support for Ukraine in countering and further resisting Russian attacks. I should note that this is already the second meeting this week. The previous one was on October 7th, after a massive attack by the Russian Federation on the gas industry. At the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they appealed to partners to increase pressure on Moscow.
These strikes last night should prompt our partners to take action, in particular the 19th package of sanctions. The decision on the 19th package of sanctions can no longer be delayed. Measures against the energy sector, against the banking sector, against Russia's shadow fleet, adding ship captains and ports to the sanctions lists, restricting Russia's access to war financing through energy. Additional sanctions against Russian diplomats, of course, restrictions, individual sanctions against propagandists and those who help Russia circumvent sanctions and find money for its crimes.
The European Union has condemned yet another massive Russian attack whose main target was once again Ukraine's energy sector. Since the beginning of the full-scale aggression by the Russian Federation, Brussels has supported Kiev and helped restore destroyed facilities. Our special correspondent for Freedom TV in Europe, Vitaly Sizov, knows how the EU reacted to yet another strike on Ukraine's energy sector.
The European Union has responded to the Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy sector. The Energy Commissioner stated that the European Union firmly supports Ukraine and will not leave it without assistance during the winter period.
We are appalled by Russia's latest attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure and energy sector, and it is innocent civilians who are paying the price for this brutality. We are working at full capacity on our next winter support package with special attention to repairs and physical protection. Dan Jurgensen, EU Commissioner for Energy, on the social network X.
Against the backdrop of targeted Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy sector, the European Commission stated that the EU has the capacity to support Ukraine during the winter period. They also emphasized that Russian strikes are damaging not only the energy sector, but that the Russian army is also destroying civilian infrastructure, hospitals, and schools. We
condemn these strikes in the strongest possible terms. Unfortunately, this has been happening since the beginning of the war. Russia is deliberately attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and this is absolutely unacceptable. The EU is maintaining contact with the Ukrainian authorities, as well as with representatives of the G7, and will continue to support Ukraine both in terms of infrastructure restoration and in providing winter assistance, as it did last year. We have additional capacity.
The main spokesperson of the European Commission, Paula Pinha, also expressed words of support for Ukraine.
Words of admiration for our Ukrainian friends who are once again preparing for a harsh winter with a devastated energy infrastructure, and who are truly enduring the winter with remarkable resilience. And we have been doing everything possible since the very beginning of the war to help Ukrainians restore this energy infrastructure.
Against the backdrop of new Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities, Dutch Foreign Minister David van Wil called for increased pressure on Russia.
Amid the cold snap, Russia is launching massive strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Instead of seriously considering peace, Putin is leaving civilians in the cold and darkness. With winter approaching, we must increase pressure on Russia and step up our support for Ukraine. David van Wil, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, on social network X.
Brussels assures that the European Union has the resources to help Ukraine's energy sector get through this winter, even in the face of Russian attacks. There is also a general understanding that pressure on Moscow must be increased to stop the aggression. Vitaly Sizov and Ruslan Kuzgov from Brussels for Freedom TV channel.
Kyiv and Amsterdam will jointly produce drones. The corresponding memorandum was signed after a meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Dutch Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans. Zelensky thanked the Netherlands for their support, particularly for the $9 billion provided to Ukraine since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. Ukraine is in urgent need of strengthening its air defense, and Warsaw will do everything possible to help in this matter, said Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. He is currently in Lviv on a working visit and has already visited the site of a Russian strike in the village of Lapayivka, where on October 5th a family of 4 was killed as a result of the Russian attack. According to Sikorski, the issue of closing the sky over Ukraine should become a joint decision of the Allies. And the recent drone attacks, including those on the territory of EU countries, should speed up the adoption of this decision.
Due to recent events, namely the violation of airspace not only of Poland but also of Romania and other EU countries, the process of closing the sky over Ukraine is moving at an accelerated pace. We are all in favor of resisting and closing the sky, but Poland is a member of NATO. We must wait for a decision from the alliance.
The German defense company Rheinmetall will deliver additional Skyranger 35 air defense systems to Ukraine based on the Leopard 1 tank. The value of the order amounts to hundreds of millions of euros. The company noted that this delivery will be financed with funds obtained from frozen Russian assets. The production and integration of the systems will take place at the company's Italian division. Work will also be carried out to adapt the systems to the requirements of the Ukrainian armed forces in order to ensure rapid integration and stable operation in the field.